country in the region, is now poised to become a global power also by seeking a seat in the permanent seat in the Security Council. Others also doing it, but we're not focusing on them. And also taking considerable interest in the evolving situation in Afghanistan. They had remained out of Afghanistan during the Soviet intervention by supporting, by and large, the Soviet moves passively, but now they are actively involved in any future settlement of Afghanistan. Now, with the rise of these Asian powers, the United States has also taken last year a new turn. And their new term is what they call Asia Pivot Policy. Asia Pivot Policy, their one objective is to increase their naval presence, gradually develop that 60% of the US Navy will be brought in this region. They are seeking, without taking over, the use of old bases in the Philippines, in Vietnam, and in other countries, and they have strengthened their military presence in the region, including Australia, and I understand a little bit also Singapore. So the United States approach is primarily a military approach. And one of the experiences that they had in Iraq was United States, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, adopted the doctrine of unilateralism. But unilateralism has practically collapsed. And they have moved from unilateralism into collective action with other countries. NATO has become one of the major instruments of collective action in certain areas, as we saw in North Africa and the Middle East. And in this region, they are moving for collective action by encouraging countries friendly to them to take a joint policy of being concerned about China's rise. So the Philippines, Vietnam, and ASEAN countries are being encouraged, and more than anybody else, Japan is especially being encouraged to take a more proactive policy in the region. It was not in the nature of the Japanese politics, but now you see Japan is slightly involved with Russian Federation, it's involved with China, it's even involved with Korea. So Japan is being a part of the collective after unilateralism. They don't say their objective is to contain China. They used to say that. Now they are a bit more careful. They say we want to manage our relations with China. The word containment has been partly abandoned. Some use it still. And they say we should collectively manage the growth of China. And naval presence, although it's primarily focused on China, they explain modestly that it is primarily for North Korea. Their policy explanations are more focusing on North Korea. In the Central Asia region, which is energy-rich area, there is, some people say, a new great game. But there is certainly a competition between the major powers in Central Asia. The Chinese are primarily focusing on economic and trade with these countries and on pipelines. The Russians have a partial military approach. They have renewed their base in Kyrgyzstan. They have renewed their military presence in Tajikistan. And the United States also has a base both in Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, but the US influence seems to be on the decline in Central Asia. And there is cooperation between Russia and China in this region, but there is also a competition between Russia and China in the Central Asian region. And this, with the declared withdrawal of America from Afghanistan, the US influence is likely to decline further, notwithstanding the fact that Brzezinski has put up the doctrine as advocating very clearly that control of Central Asia is, as in the days of Mackinder, central to the control of the rest of the influence. But their influence, if they really withdraw their troops from Afghanistan, will further decline. Now, moving away from this to the other part, which I said is the pivotal position, in Central Asia, energy is a major question. It's an energy surplus area. And the three most important out of the 5 issues of the world: energy, terrorism, and non-proliferation. The other 2 I will leave out. They are important: the climate change and environment. They are at a different philosophical level. So I will deal with these 3. In all these 3, energy, terrorism, and non-proliferation, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Iran, the 3 countries come in focus. Pakistan, unfortunately, is accused of being a place from where terrorism emerges, but in reality, it has suffered more than any other country because of terrorism. There have been 40,000 lives lost in Pakistan so far, out of which 35,000 plus are civilians and about 5,000 are members of our forces, including the army, the police, and frontier constabulary. So we have lost 40,000 plus lives in this war on terror. And our cities are totally in a stage of uncertainty, and bomb blasts are happening, target killing is taking place. So we are the worst victim of terrorism. Yet somehow the media hype is, instead of sympathy, more criticism and more blame for Pakistan. One thing is clear, that the American ISAF intervention in Afghanistan has not achieved its objective. 10 years down the line, they have not been able to pacify Afghanistan. They have not been able to control the situation. And the reason why they have not been able to do so is that it is not purely a question of war on terror. The Afghans, majority of Afghans, especially in the southern part, see it as a war of liberation against foreign occupation. And those who were policymakers in the West, they confused. The Taliban were a small group, they were very well organized, but they declared all the Pakhtuns to be Talibans. And since all were declared Taliban, now Talibans, there are anti-Pakistan Taliban, there are anti-Afghan Taliban, there are 100 kinds of different kinds of groups which are all jumped together as Taliban. But basically, it is a war of national liberation for them. And that is why they have not been defeated. Now, Pakistan has come under pressure from the United States. Like Vietnam, when they did not succeed in Vietnam, Cambodia became the victim of blame and bombing. The great powers have a weakness, they never admit that we have lost. So they find a scapegoat to justify to their own people their failure, or apparent failure, which they don't admit as failure. And in this case, their failure in Afghanistan, like their failure in Vietnam, was placed on the shoulders of Cambodia. Their failure in Afghanistan is placed on the shoulders of Pakistan. Notwithstanding the fact that Pakistan has fully cooperated with them. The Afghan problem cannot be solved without the cooperation of Pakistan and Iran together. Because we are the two countries in which there are 3 million refugees of Afghanistan and Pakistan and about 2.5 million refugees in Iran. And we are impacted. If Americans have announced that they will leave Afghanistan, India is making economic investments. They have invested about 2 billion in various projects. China is making economic investment. They have got a 4 billion contract in exploration of copper mines and building their mobile phone services and power generation. Then India has signed a strategic partnership agreement with Afghanistan for training their security forces. The announcement of withdrawal by the year 2014 has made the progress of peace talks more difficult. Those who are fighting have come to the conclusion, apparently, that if with all their might they could not prevail, now the time is on our side because they have decided to pull out. It's clear that America wants to pull out and other countries want to pull out their combatant forces, but they want to leave their strategic presence in 5 bases in Afghanistan, from where they will operate drone attacks, night raids, and watch their interests in Central Asia. So the United States is not intending to leave. They are only going to transform their role from fighting forces into strategic presence. The other conflict, which is also a great impact on Asia, is what is generally known in the name of Arab Spring. In Arab Spring, 3 things must be understood. Number one, the old movement of secular Arab nationalism, pan-Arab nationalism has declined. Pan-Arab nationalism force does not exist in the same shape. Individual Arab countries have a revival of nationalism. Secondly, the factor of Islam has become more important than the old philosophy of liberal or secular way of life. And therefore, in this region, the whole region, their developments are to the disadvantage of Israel and to the disadvantage of the United States and the West. And that is why they are now, in spite of the pivot Asia in this region, there are statements coming from the United States that not at the cost of Middle East. And Syria has become the symbolic point of conflict. And there, for the first time, the United Nations unity of the five has broken down. China and Russia have not gone along with the policy. They were more tolerant of their UN intervention in the case of Libya and North Africa. But here the conflict, the confrontation, you can say, and the philosophy of regime change as the primary instrument of policy is now being opposed. The United States pressurizes most nations to change their policy. If they don't agree, they want to change the regime either through subversion or through military intervention or through the introduction of mercenary forces. This is a serious destabilizing factor. And I think the Syria crisis will probably, in the end, evolve in a manner that negotiated settlement will have to be accepted. So basically, the new economic trends and new global trends are a economically declining West is militarily strident. An economically rising China is militarily holding its horses and is not responding in the same fashion. And there is a possibility that the philosophy of creating an harmonious international society all around, advocated by China, may become, in this global atmosphere, a necessity for all the countries. In Afghanistan, no solution which is suggested by any outsider will be acceptable. The only way to solve the Afghan problem is by encouraging a dialogue between the Afghan groups. Others can become facilitators for a dialogue, but they can't become proposers of solutions for a dialogue. This is the Afghan psychology. There are now new steps being taken. Americans showed interest in talking to the Taliban, and they established a small presence in Qatar. But that dialogue has not proceeded. Now Turkey has come into the fray, and there are better chances that a dialogue might take place through the intermediate efforts of Turkey. And this is so because Turkey is, one, an Islamic country. Second, it is also a member of NATO and hence acceptable to the West. I'll say a few things about China and about Pakistan, Afghanistan relations, because Pakistan is more deeply involved. Pakistan is more interested in its peace and stability in Afghanistan than any other country. And we have taken the following measures. One, we have a number of bilateral exchanges with Afghanistan. Our president goes there, their president comes to us, our prime minister goes, their prime minister comes, delegation exchange, youth delegations come. Then we have tripartite talks, Afghanistan, Pakistan and United States, to resolve their issues. Then we have tripartite talks, Pakistan, Afghanistan and Iran. Then we have tripartite talks, Pakistan, Afghanistan and Turkey. And then we have a mechanism of quadrangle talks, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Tajikistan and Russia. So through all these mechanisms, we are trying to work out a pacification and a peaceful. Our first concern is that the process of dialogue between Afghan groups should stop. Recently, the High Policy Council, Peace Council, which was established by Afghanistan under the leadership of Professor Rabbani, who was assassinated, was stalled. And now it has been restarted because his son has been made head of that. He recently visited Pakistan, and at his request, a few Taliban who had been detained by Pakistan have been released so that the process of negotiations can be facilitated. So our efforts for settling Afghanistan are multidimensional. An important thing is India-Pakistan relationship, in which the major powers also play a role. India-Pakistan's equation vis-a-vis United States, India-Pakistan's equation vis-a-vis China, India-Pakistan's equation vis-a-vis the Russian Federation are all in interplay. Our dialogue, which was started for 2004, came to a sudden end after the unfortunate events of Bombay. And then for 2 years, there were accusations and counter-accusations and stalling. In 2010, the dialogue was restarted. And gradually, in the last 2 years, there has been substantial easing of tensions between India and Pakistan. We have agreed to give most favored nation treatment to India, which India had already announced for Pakistan. And we are now negotiating the removal of non-tariff barriers so that this status becomes really meaningful and effective. It's believed currently that by trade, if we improve our relations, other problems can become less difficult to solve. An example is quoted of China and India. China and India have not been able to solve their border problem. China and India have not been able to resolve the Tibet issue and the Dalai Lama's presence. But they have a trade which has risen to 75 billion, and now they have a target of 100 billion mutual trade. So Pakistan has also gradually agreed to adopt the route of following the economic cooperation between India and Pakistan. And it is hoped that there will be then, through this process, less of undercurrent of tension between the two in Afghanistan as well. So by and large, with all the existing problems, I feel that the trend towards peace is becoming stronger than trend towards potential conflict. In spite of Asia pivot policy, the United States also has a strategic economic and political dialogue with China to manage their relations. And they have 70 different mechanisms of bilateral negotiations. So while the world is still in turmoil, while the economic crisis of the West has not been resolved, while the focus has shifted to Asia, I think the forces of peace are becoming gradually more effective than the forces of conflict. So I'm an optimist, and I see Asia playing a constructive role in global politics. I think that is all.
Thank you.